Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Two Chiefs, One Mike podcast. This is season 2, episode 2. I'm Chief Mike Hawkins.
And I am Chief Scott Hughes. Thanks for joining us. Mike, how are things going up in Michigan?
It's not bad, a little cold. I think we are finally above zero for once, and hopefully it's trending in the right direction, but it looks like 6 more weeks of winter. Today is Groundhog's Day, February 2nd, so we got to get rid of that and get some sunshine up here.
He saw his shadow, so we're hosed. Well, our guest today does not have to worry about this stuff we call snow, because Chief Jeremy Story is the chief of police in Las Cruces. Did I say that right?
Cruces.
Las Cruces, New Mexico. And if you're not following Jeremy on LinkedIn, you're missing out. The reason we reached out to Jeremy was he brings a awesome outside the box progressive mindset that I think we need more of in police leadership. And he shows that through his posts, through his writings on various websites, and you can just tell his leadership style and it's contagious. So, Chief Story, we appreciate you joining us on the Two Chiefs, One Mike podcast.
I appreciate you having me. Just for the record, we had snow last week and it's stuck on the ground for almost 2 hours. So we know what it is. We know what it looks like.
Still 40 degrees though, right? That doesn't count.
Yeah, I mean, it's like 60 right now, but still,
Yeah, let's just keep rubbing it in. I like it.
Chief, why don't you just start telling us a little bit about yourself, how you got into law enforcement, your background, and what brought you to Las Cruces?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief. But when I was in high school, all I wanted to be was a Marine. So everything in high school was geared towards going in the Marine Corps. I dated my wife throughout high school. We had our, ups and downs for sure, but she didn't want me to join the Marine Corps. So we broke up. I joined the Marine Corps and got back together. We got married pretty young, about 19. I went through a deployment. I went to officer candidate school. I had my first child while I was in Iraq. And so when my enlisted contract was coming up, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I was about to have my third child and I would have been in Afghanistan for a year. So I got out and I said, okay, deal, but I'm going to be a cop. So I waited for the Las Cruces Police Academy to open up. I applied, got in, and here I am. But everything happens for a reason. I wouldn't change it for the world. I've had a great career and been able to do everything I wanted to do in policing at this agency.
Are you from there?
I've been here since I was 12, so this is home. I went to high school.
Awesome. And how long have you been in the profession?
I'm on my 19th year.
Awesome. And how long is chief?
3.5 years.
Very nice. Very nice.
2.5 years. Add a year there.
Well, thank you for your service in the United States Marine Corps. You probably can't see behind me, but behind me is a tribute to my father, who passed away when I was 22 years old, but he was in Vietnam. He died after his exposure to Agent Orange. He developed cancer. So appreciate your service. So we were talking before we started recording. You rose through the ranks and you were appointed to the interim police chief for a handful of months, and then you're promoted to full-time police chief. And then I think every chief's worst nightmare happened. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, I became permanent chief in December of 23, and then on February 11th was Super Bowl Sunday 2 years ago. I got the phone call that no chief wants to get. Our agency at that time had been around for 96 years, so nearly a century. We had never lost an officer in the line of duty. So I get the phone call that an officer had been stabbed. Wasn't looking great. He had been transferred to the hospital. I get there right as I'm getting there. They had called it, and we knew that we had lost him. So there wasn't really a playbook. There wasn't a script. Nothing anybody at our department had experienced ever. And it was a very challenging time, but we also learned a lot. And there's some good that came out of it. I think every time you have something it's tough, you have an opportunity for growth. And I think we took advantage of that, but it was very challenging.
So Jeremy, if there was something you could tell a chief that may be listening, what are some of the things, maybe one or two things that you did right, or one or two things, not that we did wrong or you did wrong, but that you wish you could go back and maybe change or wish you would have done in that situation?
Yeah, there's a bunch on both sides of it. I would say do right, just be present. The most important thing is that your people see you. You need to be there. You need to be in briefings. You need to be talking to people. I was fortunate that I had a connection to I came from the academy. When I was a lieutenant, I was the academy director, training director. So that included our basic academy. I knew these guys. This was my last academy that I ran as a lieutenant before I promoted to deputy chief, which was good for me and bad for me because I knew all his classmates. I was able to have that connection. But be present. They need to see you. I've seen other departments that have lost somebody where that's not the case, and it doesn't work in your favor for sure. On the other end of the spectrum, one of the things that we realized we didn't do very well is we didn't support our families or have that connection with our families. It became very apparent afterwards that the wives were scared, the spouses and loved ones didn't know who to go to. They didn't, and so do that ahead of time. We had to scramble and try to build that program after the fact, but it would have been much better if we had already done that work ahead of time.
Yeah, I think that that's a great point. And Scott and I have talked before, especially with the younger generation of officers. And I don't know how old was Officer Jonah Hernandez. I think what was
He's in his
his
early
name.
30s, so he was older when he started as a
Okay, so we had an officer involved shooting in the last several months, and it was the families that we had to reach out to. And it's the critical incident debrief is essential for the officers. But what we did was had one for the families as well to understand what they're going through. Some of these younger officers are living at home and they're their support system. So to your point, having a playbook, and I think that's police, they have to adapt and improvise things and listening to stories like that. And that's why we ask, well, what is it that you would do different? Maybe somebody can plan on some of those things ahead of time.
Yeah, definitely. We did that. We did a spouse or a loved one, what we call a 10-12 defuse after, and brought the families in with some people from outside the department as well. But we had never done that before, so it was successful. But unfortunately, we should have done that before.
So, Chief, you're what I'm going to call an outside the box thinker. You and I probably mirror each other. You're better looking than me, but I have a sneaking suspicion based off of what I've read and folks that I've talked to. You understand that in law enforcement we cannot just keep doing things the same way we've always done them and expect things to change, whether it's through your wellness program, through your training, through your developing of leaders, to your being present. My hashtag, my tagline, if you will, is remember where you came from. I think the higher up you go, the further removed a lot of leaders get. And I'll be the first one to tell you, and both of you will agree with me that it's hard sometimes, but it's so important for your guys and gals out there doing this job to be present for them. So you've got this call it progressive attitude. You've been outspoken, you've been an advocate for changing laws, and you are from the outside looking in the kind of chief that I know I would want to work for if I was a young officer. And I'm going to venture to say that while I'm sure not every day is great in your agency, the majority of the days are. Why don't you tell our listeners the best you can? Where did that mindset come from? How did you define, if you will, kind of your leadership style? We don't have any script. We don't have any notes on this podcast. We just like to have conversations. So we'll just take it from there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would like to think that I cared about leadership from an early age. I was in junior OTC again. I wanted to do everything in high school was to be in the Marine Corps. So I had leadership positions early on, quickly there. I read a lot of books on leadership even in high school, and I've continued that throughout my entire life. I think that's one important component. And I learned a lot in the Marine Corps too about leadership is always looking to learn and grow. And as a leader, if you're constantly doing that, you are going to make yourself. I agree with you entirely that one of the biggest challenges as a chief is making sure you maintain perspective because there's so many different aspects of policing and we can get lost in what we have to deal with as a chief that officers shouldn't even have to concern themselves with. And you just a little bit of countering that with either going to briefing or taking, an hour on the streets, you take one shoplifting call. It's a good reminder that it's not as simple as you remember it. There's more components that go to it. You can mess up stuff along any one of those steps. That's been helpful for me. I don't spend as much time as I'd like, but man, it does renew my perspective very quickly. And I think that makes me a better chief. On the flip side, if you give your people perspective, whether it's your sergeants, or lieutenants, or your officers, not a lot, because they don't need to be concerned with everything that a chief is, but it does help bridge that gap because a lot of the decisions we have to make are for their good, but it's hard for them to understand that unless they get a little bit of perspective for the bigger picture.
So you were with Las Cruces your entire career, correct? Okay. So taking over as chief, and we don't want to talk about things that may be good or bad before then, but you sit in the chair and you step into that office. What were some of the priorities that you had taking over or some ideas that you wanted to bring change to the department?
And I think it's a huge benefit that I grew up in this agency. It's hard for a chief to come in from the outside. Sometimes it's necessary, but man, that's way harder. I I watched and I learned from the previous chief, and he was a good chief. He was very good to me. I think one of the things he even recognized, especially towards the end, is that where he failed was not being more vocal and not doing a better job of educating and advocating to the public, to city council, to all these people who were saying things out of ignorance. So I made a decision before it was even official that I'm going to try to do the complete opposite. I'm going to talk to anyone who wants to talk, regardless of which side of the aisle they are, what their beliefs are. If they want to talk in good faith, let's talk. I'm going to be aggressive in a good way with educating city council, the public, putting information out. And it's really served me well. I've seen a lot of fruits. It generates some negative attention for me too, but I think it's definitely been a benefit overall.
So, and you said earlier, I think off camera, you have around 200 or 200 plus officers, correct, in the department?
220 commission officers is what we're allotted.
Okay. So Scott and I come from smaller agencies where that community policing aspect is a lot easier. We're hands on, smaller communities. What's it like for you? And you had mentioned the community and talking to everybody. How is it received? How are you getting out there talking to folks out in the community?
Me personally, it's going to these different community groups. I've talked to business groups, which tend to be a little more conservative. I talked to what we have a group called the Progressive Voters Alliance, which tends to be on the other end of the spectrum. I talked to politicians. I have a lot of discussions with both state and local politicians on both sides of the aisle. So that's been very helpful for me and hopefully for them too. From the department, the larger standpoint, we have a lot of people that are doing that work of educating. So traffic's out there talking to different groups. We have a community outreach section that does all kinds. Honestly, they do a little bit of everything, but they're very good at doing community events and making contact with people and bridging that gap between some of the groups that historically have not supported law enforcement. And then to put it all together is the public information. Because when we do one of these events, let's say 100 people show up, that's a great turnout, but only 100 people know about it unless we put it out there and say, hey, look at this event, see the benefit it was to the community. So the public information side, especially with social media, has been really.
Chief, I want to back you up just a little bit. We hear from a lot of chiefs, aspiring chiefs, that one of the biggest issues or biggest obstacles that chiefs have is communicating with public officials, i.e., elected officials, excuse me. And you mentioned a second ago that one of the things that you did was you really helped educate, in your case, a city council member. Again, for a chief listening or someone who's aspiring to be a chief, or maybe someone who has to deal with elected officials, that can be a challenge. And I certainly don't want to speak for all elected officials, but I can tell you through my experiences with people that I talk to around the country, one of the issues that we face in law enforcement in particular, or probably really any department head who's in a municipality, sometimes folks become elected officials and now they're the experts in everything from policing to stormwater management to zoning to tax codes to you name it. How did you form those relationships with the elected officials? And if you can cite some examples, specific examples to whatever you're comfortable speaking of, I think that might be helpful for folks to know this is exactly what I did to help those relationships.
And I do that all the time. And not, every chief has a different situation. I'm fortunate that I have a city manager who's my boss, and he has council and mayor who's his boss. So I have that buffer, and I've had two city managers, both of them have been great, and they allow me to do my job, and they encourage me to have communication with council, talk to them. So I sit down. Some of them obviously I have more communication with than others, but some of them are the ones that question the stuff we do more than the other ones do. Couple examples. I could think of some cases early on it with both council and some state elected officials. Some uses of force where we just sit down and we actually talk about the facts and the details and we discuss it. And I think they came to a different conclusion in the end. License plate readers is another one just recently that's kind of come back up, and just having those conversations with the media and the elected officials and say, hey, here's the truth. If you don't like the facts, that's fine, but let's at least get to the facts because all this other stuff is nonsense. So let's cut through that. Here's why. Here's an example of what that picture looks like. So a lot of it's being transparent, trying to give them everything you possibly can without compromising anything. Because if you just provide the information, a lot of times it takes away are they hiding something? Are they holding back? I think that helps a lot.
I would agree. I feel like whether you align with them or not, whether you think you're going to go out and have a cigar and drink a beer with them is irrelevant. It's the transparency part, right? Just put it all out there. I feel like sometimes when folks run for office, they get in there with maybe an agenda or a belief that this is what's occurring. And then when you get in there and you're actually in the hot seat and you actually have conversation with department heads and you kind of see what's actually going on, I feel like maybe sometimes it's a different perspective. Certainly not the case all the time, but I think to your point, if we just explain it in the facts, stick with the facts, don't take sides, I do think that that does go a long way. And being a new chief, it helps to establish that rapport. And I think it gives them a sense of credibility, right? Trust. We've talked on here 100 times that trust is the backbone of all relationships. And if you are presenting facts and they fact check you and they determine, hey, he is telling me the facts, he's not trying to sway my opinion one way or another, I think that goes a long way. So that's good. That's good stuff.
So, Chief, I was searching online and I see juvenile violent crime is a big problem for you. But I also saw you won an award last night. What was that? Was it a sword? What the heck was that?
I don't want to call it a katana because it's probably not a katana. I'm sure there's some other, like my son said, no, that's not a katana. The handle's too long. So I'm not sure what the official title is, but it's Japanese sword and
Gotcha.
with the little plaque. It's really cool. One of the cooler awards I've won in my.
So the juvenile violent crime, what is the problem? What do you have out there? I know you were going to the legislature trying to propose bills, and I think they got shot down. Is that what I read?
The juvenile ones are still in play. The one I think
Okay.
has the best chance of passing still hasn't had a committee hearing yet. So hopefully that will happen. But I still have some hope for sure. And what we're seeing is an increase specifically in serious violent crime. So the one of the statistics I like to highlight because I think it kind of summarizes the situation is from 2015 to 2019 in Las Cruces, we had zero kids, zero juveniles charged with murder or manslaughter. So from 2015 to 2019, zero. From 2020 to 2025, I've had 17 charged with murder or manslaughter. And then you talk about aggravated batteries, aggravated assaults, what we call those drive-bys. Our drive-bys have spiked drastically. We've seen a lot more drive-bys where structures or vehicles are actually being hit. We had Young Park, which is one of our local parks, where 3 people were killed and 15 were shot, all from basically a dispute between juveniles primarily. And we've had too many of those types of incidents. That's not the only one where we've had these tragedies. So we're seeing a lot of serious violent crime, including young people losing their lives.
I know one issue that we've talked about before, and I've been on some radio shows and some syndicate shows. Juvenile crime is quite honestly, it's out of control coast to coast. And part of the reason is there's no accountability at the juvenile level. In a lot of locations throughout this country, a juvenile gets arrested before the officers even left the facility doing the paperwork or the processing. They're already on the phone. They, being the facility, is already on the phone trying to find a parent or a guardian to come pick them up because they're not holding them. You've got repeat offenders who are out committing, more serious crimes, and it's just this vicious cycle that we've seen play out. And then unfortunately it sounds like ultimately sometimes it ends with tragedy, like three uh young adults murdered. You've been outspoken on that, which again I think is rare. We've talked again on this show about the differences between a police chief and an elected sheriff. I think most police chiefs around this country have to be, for lack of better words, guarded with what they say for fear of upsetting someone. And most police chiefs work at the pleasure of a city manager or a mayor, where sheriffs can be a little more outspoken. And one thing about you, Jeremy, that I appreciate is you're not afraid to speak out. Again, the stuff that I've read about you, what you've posted, the interviews you've done, what I think folks need to understand is I can stick to the facts, right? You said that before. If you just stick to the facts and don't sway, I feel like you can have a voice. And I would love to see more police chiefs be outspoken with some of these issues like juvenile crime. So it's clear to me that you have a supportive staff, a city manager or mayor and council really backs you. And if the results are occurring, then I assume they're going to let you continue being this voice and being this advocate. And I know the men and women inside your police department appreciate you being that voice, because when a chief of police speaks out like you have and you stick to the facts, you don't just speak for the officers inside your police department. Quite honestly, you're impacting cops across this entire country.
Appreciate that. Two things I'll say is one, the city manager, the mayor, and council has supported me. They don't all love everything I'm doing, but it's enough that I have the support to keep doing it. And I will say, chiefs, we have the New Mexico Association of Chiefs of Police. There are chiefs of police from throughout New Mexico who are up in Santa Fe. And at any given hearing that has something that's relevant to us, you'll have 4 or 5 chiefs or deputy chiefs in that hearing, if not more. So we, as a state, we've done a much better job the last few years of advocating for the things that we're really telling the truth and letting them hear our side of the story. Because before it was the public defenders, it's the ACLU, it's Disability Rights New Mexico, it's all the people who really have a counter narrative that are in the ears of our lawmakers. And we need to counter that with what our experience is. It's very different.
So, Jeremy, 2 years, 2.5 years in, what is some advice that you would give to an up and coming chief or somebody newly taking the seat that you've experienced, that you've learned that you could give and provide somebody?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if anybody. I don't know if you both felt ready when you took over your departments. I definitely did not. It wasn't the timing I would have chosen. I was only deputy chief for 10 months. But that being said, I would rely on other chiefs as much as possible. Have mentors with nearby geographically or with LinkedIn anywhere in the country, because I guarantee someone else has been through it or something very similar. You don't have to figure it out on your own. Talk to people, have mentors, bounce ideas off. Hopefully, you have deputy chiefs or a deputy chief that you also trust to give you the truth. I have that for sure. They'll tell me if they think there's something problematic and I need to hear it. But you don't have to do it alone. So don't.
And I think, Scott, we talked offline and we met at the FBI National Academy, and you said you had the opportunity and you gave it to a deputy chief and maybe in the future. But I think that was the best part of it, was realizing there's 251 other people all having the same issues, same problems, from the smallest of agencies to the largest of agencies. And it's that strength in numbers for the chief saying, wow, we're all in this together, and now we can bounce these ideas off different people. In one of my classes there was, you have to have your board of directors. They don't all have to be police officers. You can have a chief, you can have somebody from outside, but somebody that you can rely on to give you that good information and good insight.
Yeah, that's absolutely essential. Even these small, I go to a 1 week class for FBI. I've done a couple of those, and you're around chiefs. It's encouraging, I guess, to talk to them because they have very similar problems. You're not an anomaly. People are people. They're going to do crazy things. Sometimes you got to deal with. And then, of course, my wife has been, we were married before I started the police department, and she's a huge support, but she's also a rational voice for me with certain things I can share with her and talk to her about.
Jeremy, I just wrote a blog post over the weekend, and it's up to almost 40,000 views on LinkedIn. It's been shared a couple hundred times already. You'd think I learned my lesson after the first time this happened to me, but here we are. And it had to do with how police officers are trained when compared to a professional athlete and the standard that we're held to and all that sorts of stuff. One area in policing that I know is important to you and means a lot to you is law enforcement training. It's my understanding that one of the issues you tackled early on in your career, or maybe you just continued doing as you became chief, was how you're training your officers there at your agency. Again, I hate to keep saying the same thing, but you appear to be looking at it outside the box, and you don't just view training as a check the box. We did it. Here's your certificate. Move on to the next thing. You have invested in this through personnel, through equipment, all that good stuff. Why don't you talk about training, what you've done there, and then maybe you hit on this earlier, but maybe after you get done with that, maybe just explain a little bit more detail about the wellness side of the house and kind of what you've done internally there with wellness.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny you say that. The first post I ever did on LinkedIn was around that same vein with comparing professional athletes, the military, and how they train versus how they perform. It's very different than law enforcement. And I understand, like in a perfect world, I would have officers probably doing 20 hours of training and 20 hours on the streets, something like that. That's possible to do, but we should be training probably as much as we're out on the streets because policing is so complex. There's so many different facets of it. I was fortunate to be an instructor early on in my career and just kind of build on that. And then, like I said earlier, I was a training director. So I really got to push it forward. Just relying on, there's a lot of evidence out there for what works in policing, what's important, what doesn't. I love the book Make It Stick from a bigger perspective on how we teach, how we learn ourselves, how we can get better and become an expert at anything or teach others to be experts. And applying that, one of the biggest problems with policing is even when we do train, we use outdated models that are terrible for learning. And by learning, I mean retention and transfer. Because I don't care if someone can get 100 on a written test. I mean, that's important, but it's actually not important if they can't recall it 6 months later at all, or they can't apply it, they can't transfer it. If they can learn a technique for defensive tactics, but they can't transfer it and do that in realistic context, it's irrelevant. So we do need more time training, but probably where we need to start is the time we have. Let's not check the box. Let's not just go through the motions and do block training. Let's actually do training that's going to make cops learn and keep that information when they need it and apply it in the real world. I think it's a great start for us. And it's hard, but we have the guidebooks out there. We have the information.
So many agents, before you get to wellness, thanks for that. So many agencies, you're right, it's outdated. They will go over a policy, they'll spend 8 hours going over policies, right? Death by PowerPoint. And then they'll give them a test, and then they'll pass the test. And then something will happen down the road, and they'll pull that file out, right? And they'll be like, oh, but look, I got it right here. He or she knew the policy because look, they took the test. One of the best analogies I ever heard, analogy might not be the right word, but whatever. One of the best statements I ever heard was someone once said to me that I could give anybody a book on how to fly a 747, and you could read that book, and then I could give you a test and you could ace that test. But nobody's going to get in a plane if you've never actually flown a 747. So in other words, you can test me on the policies all you want, but if I can't apply that skill set, then it's nothing, right? I'm being a little tongue in cheek, but you get the idea. So kudos to you for again thinking outside the box and realizing, hey, this way of doing things just isn't getting it done. And I agree with you. We've talked about this before. I think the only way that we actually we change how we're training is the whole entire law enforcement kind of model has to be blown up, right? You know, Firefighters have got this figured out. And when they're not, I've said this before, when they're not putting the wet stuff on the hot stuff, what are they doing? They're training. They're pulling hose. They're doing rope drills. They're doing something every single day. Most law enforcement agencies across this country, you show up 5 minutes before your shift starts, and the sergeant starts to do something, and boom, you got calls pending. And they're like, just go get them. We drag a cop in for a training day on their off day after they worked all night. It's just a mess. So kudos to you for thinking outside the box in that regard. Along those same lines, like me, like Mike, you've really embraced wellness. You've really embraced physical fitness, wellness, if you will, as well as the mental side of the house. Why don't you tell our listeners kind of what you're doing there at your agency to invest in your folks from a wellness perspective?
And some of this stuff was already in place from previous chief, especially the previous chief. But we try to just continue to grow it and actually learn from our, is that working? Maybe we need to do this instead. So we've tried everything. Our initial approach is kind of everything in the kitchen sink. Let's just have everything, and then they'll have the right resource for the right time for that person. Which I think it's a better approach than just having one thing or nothing. But we've had, we have multiple layers of counseling. Of course, most people have like an EAP that's available to their employees. We have a police psychologist on contract. I have an officer wellness coordinator, which was a little bit later. He happens to be a licensed psychologist as well. And then we contract with a company that specializes in first responder, primarily law enforcement counseling. They have multiple counselors that usually have a connection, either former law enforcement, married to law enforcement. They do things like EMDR. So that's important. We have peer support, which if you do it right, is probably one of the most effective things. If you lose trust, like you were talking about earlier, the program's done. So it's better to do it right than try to rush it. But peer support, we've had several officers who have gotten the help they need before something bad happened, before they fell off a cliff, because they had peer support and we were able to get them to the right place. Financial wellness is that, cops make terrible financial decisions in general. I have a rookie cop with a $90,000 truck and a $400,000 house, single income. That's the kind of stuff they do. So we have a financial wellness program. I find that the people who need it the most are the least likely to actually follow through. And the people who are already pretty good with money get better with money. But it's there. We've had Cortico, we've had Powerline, these different apps. The usage has not been there, in my opinion. I'm not saying they're bad in of themselves, but I think there's more important things. I talked about the police wellness coordinator. And, one of the things we actually just started our full class today is a program called Struggle Well by Boulder Crest. The Boulder Crest Foundation is who developed this program for law enforcement. They started with military. And just to put it simply, it's the concept that when something bad happens, when there's trauma, whether it's at one incident, like losing Officer Hernandez, or just the cumulative trauma that happens in law enforcement or life, you have a choice. You either have post-traumatic injury, post-traumatic stress, makes your life worse, or you have post-traumatic growth that makes your life better. And Struggle Well is about how do I learn to embrace the struggle so that it actually makes my life better. And I look back at 5 years, I say, you know what, that sucked, but look at where I am now. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that bad thing happening. So that we did, all of our command staff went through it. We sent some peer support out first. They vetted it. Then we brought it in. All of our command staff went through it. And then now it's the first full class for officers and supervisors. So I've still
Wow.
a few things, but I think
Yeah, a few things. I mean, that's a lot. That's great. In an agency like mine, small agency, we did not have a lot. So I try and steal ideas from people like you, from Scott, and and do some of those things on a smaller scale. But it sounds like you guys are doing an outstanding job in keeping the wellness of your officers top priority.
we tried everything. One thing I'll mention that I personally like, although I'm not as consistent as I used to be, is we did contracts with a local place for cold exposure, deliver cold exposure, heat exposure. That's sauna and cold plunging. So that was available. We actually have them in the stations now. And then we try to.
Do they use them? That's the question.
So, you know what's interesting and it's paradoxical, but when we had that contract, the usage was way higher than I thought. We had a lot of people going offsite to this place to use it. We brought it in house thinking, well, it's going to be even easier now. You just change out, go in, and you change back over. But the usage actually went down. And the expert people with that, it's getting out of the building and going to do something that's relaxing. It's harder to do it inside the building.
So I was talking to Scott earlier, and so we're building a brand new station here, and it should be done in another year. And one of the things the officers wanted was sauna and cold plunge. I thought, well, all right, why not? And so that story scares me a little bit. Probably used for a little while and then sit there empty. But at least we're going to give it a shot.
I think it's worth it. I think for the people who use it, some of them are like, it changes my life, and it changed my life. And some people are like, it definitely helps me. So you're gonna get benefit for the people who use it.
I love it. I love it. I think it's I love the outside the box. I'll show you this. Sitting right here next to me is my red light therapy that I that I
You should try
use
that
in
on
the
your head.
that's the light up there.
Yeah, Jeremy, another year you might join the club. I don't know how you started, right?
Base now. There's a few grades in.
I love it. I love the outside the box. I mean, I know I've said about 10 times outside the box, but that's just the best way to describe it. And the what I get excited about this profession is the up and coming leaders, right? Because I'm confident there's folks that are listening to this who have been around the block for a few times and are like, why in the hell would we want to do? But the disconnect between that thought process and this generation is what's hurting, I feel like, those agencies, right? This younger generation, there's a ton of research out there that shows the benefits of red light, sauna, cold plunging. Chief, if I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, I think your guys and gals practice BJJ or some type of ground fighting fairly consistently. There's so much research out there that shows the benefit to doing all of that stuff. When you've got folks coming on a podcast and you're listening to this and everyone's telling you the same thing in one way or the other, that, hey, this is the things you need to be doing, then that is like your job, right? Go do it. Figure out a way to make it happen. And you may not be able to make it happen overnight, but slowly increment, these changes is what will help you, your leadership style. I think it will help the agency culture and the morale. You're never going to make everybody happy 100% of the time. It's just not possible. You're going to have enemies. That's just going to happen, comes with the territory. But to Mike's point earlier, if we can make everybody happy most of the time, I think then we're on the right path. So we're coming up on about the 40-minute mark, and I know Mike's got a hard stop, and Chief, you're 3 hours behind us. So you're still working, so we don't want to take up much more of your time. Is there anything that you feel like you wanted to get across, or that you want to have covered, that you would want folks to know? As we told you before we started recording, I think a lot of our listeners are chiefs who want to become better chiefs, or folks who are aspiring to become chiefs. So maybe if there's nothing you specifically want to take away, maybe what are your top 2 or 3 things that you would say to a new chief or to someone who's aspiring to be a chief?
I think one of the things that's been beneficial, especially doing stuff like this, you get kind of confirmation that you're on the right path. If you're just on an island and you don't have mentors, you're not looking at, hey, what are other people doing? You're going to miss opportunities and ideas because most of the things we're doing, well, they weren't great ideas that I came up with. I'm stealing them or I'm adapting them from other people. Like, oh, that's good, but we should do it this way here. So be involved, I guess, is what I'm saying. I mean, whether that's IACP, that's going to NA or other classes that come your way, being on LinkedIn and just reading some of the literature that gets shared. And there's a lot of stuff you could find out on LinkedIn. There's a lot of evidence out there for what works in policing, whether it's crime reduction, wellness, training, all those things. Doesn't mean you have to take it as gospel, read it, compare it to other literature. But when you start to see trends, start to implement those things in your agency where you can.
It's awesome.
So, Jeremy, we started 2026. What is new on the horizon? What do you have ready to launch at your department? What ideas in the next year or two do you have that we're going to see?
So we're trying to take some of this stuff to the next level. So two things that are kind of new for 2026. We just hired another PIO, comes from news, a reporter and anchor background, really good with social media. So she's already putting out a lot of stuff that's doing exactly what we want. Tell our story. We're missing so many opportunities to tell the positive side of policing that's already happening, just nobody knows about it.
I always say we do a bad job of promoting ourselves.
Absolutely, we do. And you can't put everything out there. And I know the cops don't do it for that reason, but it makes the community feel, I mean, it builds trust when they go, hey, man, these cops really do care and look at the job they're doing. So you got to balance that out. That's part of it. So public information, telling our story even better in 2026. And then we're implementing a concept called stratified policing, which is just one take on evidence-based policing. That's how do you take all the evidence about what reduces crime and how do you operationalize it in a department? So it becomes as normal as reactive policing. I get a call for service, I go handle the call. When I'm not on a call for service, I have these specific things that I know I need to do or I know that work. And these are the problem areas, these are problem locations. I think even stratified policing might be taught at the National Academy, at least A class. But that's just us taking evidence-based policing and trying to make it a little bit more structured and solid.
I love it. I love it. That's good stuff. Good stuff. Mike, final thoughts?
You know, Jeremy nailed it. I love doing this podcast because I get to hear the ideas from the people we have on here and steal them and modify, like you said, and take what works. Nobody in this chair knows everything. You're learning every day. And I think it's great to have people like Chief Story on that is progressive, is doing things a lot of us want to do, a lot of us wish we could do, and some that are. So I want to thank you for being on here. And I look forward to following your career, following you on LinkedIn, and seeing what's new for the Las Cruces Police Department. So, Chief Story, thank you very much for coming on to Two Chiefs, One Mike podcast. And hopefully we'll touch base again soon.
Thank you both for having me and for the content you put out. Thank you.
Chief, if folks want to get a hold of you, what's the best way?
LinkedIn is the best way. I have the Instagram I have is I do it just for my competitive shooting. So it's pretty narrow. So LinkedIn is the place. But of course, if they want, they can look up Las Cruces Police Department and my email, my phone number on.
Well, for everyone again who's on LinkedIn, make sure you're following Jeremy's Story on LinkedIn. Pay attention to what he's doing because he's doing it the right way. So, Chief, again, thanks for coming on. Appreciate your time, and we look forward to maybe having you on again sometime.
Thank you, Chiefs. Appreciate you.
All right. Thank you.